Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is NJOKU, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about my Week 5 hidden gems for the 2024 fantasy football season. Over the course of today's episode, I'm going to be introducing players at a variety of different positions, players that you would consider to be sleeper options going into Week 5. I like to call them my hidden gems based on everyone's favorite cinematic universe. Now, because of the snap that occurred earlier this week, many of our rosters are relatively thin. Because the 4 teams on bye with the Eagles, Titans, Chargers, and Detroit Lions all absent, and all of the injuries that have occurred, many of us are scrambling in order to set our lineups going into Week 5. So I'm going to suggest 6 players, share with you guys my thought process and opinions while also presenting statistics in order to justify the reasons as to why we want to potentially start these players in order to help us capture a victory in Week 5. Now, before I proceed to talk about these players, a reminder, at the end of today's video, I will be putting together a couple pick'ems up via Underdog Fantasy. Again, if you guys haven't checked them out, there's a link down in the description. If you sign up today using code Andrew and make a first-time deposit minimum of $10, not only are you going to be able to claim the first-time deposit offer, but you'll get my rankings sent to you from my email directly to yours every single Sunday morning for the remainder of the season. These rankings consist of quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, kicker, defense, and flex, half PPR, full PPR, all-encompassing rankings. Check out the right side of the screen and the map to determine your eligibility based on your current location. If you haven't used a code in the past, you will be eligible, but if you are not eligible based on location or using a code in the past, you can always check out the Patreon link down in the description. Thank you very much for all the support. All right, so let's get into talking about our hidden gems, beginning with the Soul Stone. Like we talk about every single week, the Soul Stone requires a sacrifice. And unfortunately, it's a sacrifice of a player that we love. And going into this week, we will be sacrificing Jonathan Taylor, who is not going to be participating in this upcoming Sunday's game against the division rival, the Jacksonville Jaguars. Unfortunately, Jonathan Taylor sustained an ankle injury last week, and the expectation was that even at the beginning of the week via waiver wires was that TREY would have to step in for the absence of Jonathan Taylor. And because of this injury, TREY has an opportunity now, currently only rostered in 40% of Yahoo leagues and only started in 21% of leagues, to have himself a huge impact in terms of not only filling in, but putting together a great overall performance for fantasy purposes. Now, this upcoming week, like I mentioned, they do take on the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jacksonville Jaguars matchup as a whole, it's middle of the pack. They are the 18th best matchup in regards to fantasy points per game allowed to opposing running backs in terms of rushing statistics isolated. Thus far this season, they're allowing 12.43 fantasy points per game within that category. But if you go ahead and just look at the last 3 games of overall production allowed, against Houston, 21 carries for 78 yards. Against Buffalo, 21 carries for 79 yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. And against Cleveland, 22 for 101. So again, there is a lot of success that could potentially be found by TREY within the overall matchup. And when we look at TREY overall track record of him participating as the starting running back of this Indianapolis Colts team, in which he's given ample opportunity, it's only ever happened once. You go back to week 15 of last season, where Zach Moss and Jonathan Taylor were both injured against the Pittsburgh Steelers. In that game, given 17 rushing attempts for 88 rushing yards. But even if you go back to 2021, when given ample opportunity of 19 rushing attempts as a member of the San Francisco 49ers backfield, in that game, 19 attempts against the Seattle Seahawks, leading to 89 total rushing yards. He's definitely a solid running back, but when you're behind an elite offensive line, the expectation for success is that much higher, considering the offensive line is going to be able to impose their will against the Jacksonville Jaguars like they typically do twice a season. Now, the other consideration besides, Jonathan Taylor's absence is the fact that there's a potential in which Anthony Richardson is not expected to play. Now, the reason why this is currently leading in that direction is because earlier today, according to James Boyd of The Athletic, who is a Colts correspondent, he went ahead and put out a tweet that said the following: "Looks like Colts quarterback Joe Flacco is taking most, if not all, of the first team reps today. Anthony Richardson is standing behind Joe Flacco right now and just watching him throw during the red zone / end zone drill." If this is going to be a situation where Anthony Richardson and Jonathan Taylor are both out, that provides all of the red zone upside to a guy like TREY. Because again, without Anthony Richardson having the rushing threat, if you go back to last season, 2023, in the game in which he played against the Jacksonville Jaguars, he had 10 rushing attempts for 40 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown. So with no Jonathan Taylor, no Anthony Richardson, and all of the red zone rushing utilization in the direction of TREY, his overall upside for success with Joe Flacco at quarterback, who provides a huge boost to this offense and is going to allow them to continue to score, I believe TREY is an automatic play in the top 20 capacity going into this week. Now, continuing on the subject of the Indianapolis Colts, I want to continue with the reality stone, because the reality of the situation is that as of right now, Josh Downs is only being started in 5% of leagues because a lot of people think that Anthony Richardson still has a chance to play. Now, I wouldn't say it's completely out of the realm of possibility, but based on what I read just moments ago in regards to TREY, and I'll repeat again just in case for those of you who skipped the section of TREY and came immediately here for you the timestamps, based on the overall report put out by James Boyd of The Athletic, a Colts correspondent, he said the following earlier today: Looks like Colts quarterback Joe Flacco is taking most, if not all, of the first team reps today. Anthony Richardson is standing behind Flacco right now and just watching him throw during the red zone and end zone drill. If we're going to be in a situation where, of course, Joe Flacco is the starting quarterback, very similar production to last week may be able to persist for Josh Downs as one of the primary receiving threats of this offense that, again, hasn't been given very much opportunity this season because he's only just recently coming off of an injury. But last week, in 3.5 quarters of play with Joe Flacco, had 8 targets, 7 receptions, 71 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown for 16.6 fantasy points in a half PPR scoring format. We saw it last season when Joe Flacco took over for the Cleveland Browns. Joe Flacco from weeks 13 through 17 as the starting quarterback elevated, guys like Amari Cooper from averaging 12.3 fantasy points per game to 22.8 fantasy points per game. David NJOKU elevated from averaging 10.02 fantasy points per game to 18.2 fantasy points per game. The upside that revolves around the receiving threats of this offense, Michael Pittman Jr., Josh Downs, going into this week is extremely elevated. And when we look at the history of Josh Downs' overall career, going back to 2023, his rookie campaign for the Indianapolis Colts, in games in which he was given 6 or more targets per game, was averaging 10.36 fantasy points per game. He was able to get himself 6 or more targets in 8 overall contests last year, a vast majority of them with Gardner Minshew. But now that you have Joe Flacco, who again has shown himself to be a great quarterback for fantasy purposes as of late, the expectation is that, of course, Josh Downs should be started going into the given week at a pretty high capacity, especially when we take into consideration over the course of the last 2 games, Josh Downs has played 95% of his overall snaps from the slot position. As of late, the Jacksonville Jaguars haven't been able to stop opposing slot receivers. Stephon Diggs last week, 5 receptions, 69 receiving yards. The week prior, Khalil Shakir, 6 receptions, 72 and a touchdown. The Jacksonville Jaguars on a per-game average thus far this season have allowed 68 receiving yards per game to opposing slot receiving options. So if we're going to be in a situation where the Jacksonville Jaguars, who primarily play cover 1, the second most amongst all teams in the National Football League, only second to the Cleveland Browns, they're playing a lot of man coverage. If they're going to play man coverage against Josh Downs within the slot position, I would anticipate that, of course, Joe Flacco is going to light him up with a bunch of targets and lead to his fantasy success. Moving on to the Power Stone, we have Antonio Gibson. Look, the fact of the matter is, I typically want to have a Power Stone, which is a power back of sorts. And even though Antonio Gibson can get it done on the ground or through the air, the fact of the matter is the comments that were made earlier this week by Gerard Mayo, the current head coach of the New England Patriots, leads me to believe that there's going to be more of a feature role for Antonio Gibson going forward. When he was asked whether he would consider potentially replacing Ramondre Stevenson because he has fumbled 4 times already thus far this season and lost 2 of those fumbles, his response to the media was the following: "That's definitely under consideration. I've had multiple conversations with Ramondre. We can't preach that ball security is job security and still have him out there for the majority of the time." So if that means that Ramondre Stevenson going forward, because of his troubles, fumbling the ball, is going to potentially give Antonio Gibson more and more opportunity, well, we're going to hopefully fire him up taking on an incredible matchup against the Miami Dolphins. We've talked about the Miami Dolphins matchup every single week thus far this season. They're giving up the most fantasy points per game based on rushing statistics isolated, 21.8 on a per game average. If you go ahead and just take the total fantasy points scored by running backs, including receiving statistics, over the course of the last 4 games against the Miami Dolphins, the numbers stack up as such: 18.2 to the Jacksonville Jaguars, 35.0 to the Buffalo Bills, 25.3 to the Seattle Seahawks, and 28.7 most recently to the running backs of the Tennessee Titans. The Dolphins are allowing over 4.3 yards per carry on average to opposing running backs, and if Antonio Gibson is going to be given more and more opportunity, considering Ramondre Stevenson's snap counts are continuing to decrease, and so are his overall touches. When we look at weeks 1 and 2, Ramondre Stevenson was playing 75% of the snaps. Weeks 3 and 4, only playing 50% of the overall snaps. Over the course of the last 2 games, Ramondre, 23 total touches, Gibson, 17 total touches. If we're going to give Gibson more touches, again, you got to remember, this is a former RB1, top 12 at the position in 2020 and in 2021. He is a former wide receiver turned running back and certainly has the capabilities of being a contributor on third down. Over the course of his entire career, in games in which he's been given 10 or more touches, averaging 12.61 fantasy points per game. If the New England Patriots offense continues to lean in the direction of decreasing the overall usage of Ramondre Stevenson and highlighting more of Antonio Gibson, especially going into this week, currently started in 13% of leagues, I think there's a likelihood that he has himself a major game for fantasy purposes, especially considering the fact that the Miami Dolphins offense cannot function. Over the course of the last 2 games, the Miami Dolphins offense has put up the following statistics. In week 3, they were 1 for 12 on third down. That's an 8% success rate. And they had 205 total net yards. Additionally, in week 4, 2 for 12 on third downs, 17%, and additionally, 184 total net yards. If in fact that offense does not improve, the New England Patriots should be running the ball down their throat with both Ramondre, but especially more highlights of Antonio Gibson. Moving on to the Space Stone. The Space Stone is a player that, like I mentioned every single week, is going to shoot for the moon and fall amongst the stars. And originally, I did have Dontavion Wicks in this overall position, but Dontavion Wicks already had himself a 20-point performance last week. So now we talk about a player who's currently only rostered in 17% of Yahoo leagues that has a potential to fill in for Khalil Shakir, currently due to his ankle injury, is out. So going into this week, he's filling in for Khalil Shakir, who is the #1 receiving target of this offense. He leads the team in terms of total targets, in terms of total receptions, etc. So going up against the Houston Texans, they're going to call upon Curtis Samuel's number to step up, especially considering the comments that were made by Joe Brady earlier this week. He said, and I quote, "Curtis Samuel has to play more. I need to find ways to get him the ball because when the ball is in his hands, good things happen." Joe Brady is a former offensive coordinator that was an OC for Curtis Samuel back in 2020 with the Carolina Panthers. In that season, Curtis Samuel set his career high in terms of total receptions. So if we're going to see Curtis Samuel utilized within the Khalil Shakir role going into this week's matchup against the Houston Texans, I'm anticipating a lot of success. And even though Curtis Samuel hasn't been very much so a presence within this offense, understand that he's only just coming off of that turf toe injury that he sustained in training camp. That is why his season has been slow to start. But eventually, of course, like Joe Brady, their offensive coordinator, has mentioned this week, they want to get him the ball more. Just looking back at last season, in regards to his overall efforts with the Washington Commanders, in games in which Curtis Samuel was given 5 or more targets, was averaging 12.27 fantasy points per game in a half PPR scoring format. Thus far this season, over the course of the last 3 games, Khalil Shakir's overall targets, 5, 6, and 5. That's all the kind of opportunity we're asking for. Just give him a couple overall receptions to make plays after the catch, specifically down near the red zone, and Curtis Samuel's going to deliver for fantasy purposes. Moving on to the time stone, because it's finally time for a 3rd consecutive week for a player to come off injury and ball out. A couple weeks back was Jake Ferguson. Last week was Jordan Addison. And now we have an opportunity for David NJOKU to step up with the task on hand. That task specifically being giving value back to the tight end position where we have lost it over the course of the last couple weeks. Honestly, the tight end position has been very bleak. But if in fact you have an opportunity of starting David NJOKU, who's currently only being started in 24% of Yahoo leagues, I think this is an opportune time to fire him up and find some production. When we go back to week 1 and look at his overall usage, in the 2.5 quarters that he played prior to his ankle injury, 5 targets, 4 receptions, 44 receiving yards. Again, incredible overall numbers, and amongst all tight ends thus far this season, based on those statistics alone, is #2 amongst all in terms of yards per route run, only behind Dallas Goedert. Now, when we take into account the matchup against the Washington Commanders, if you guys saw Thursday's episode in regards to tight end rankings, again, the overall matchup as a whole in terms of fantasy points per game allowed isn't great by the Washington Commanders, but the tight ends that they've played against aren't great either. Week 1, K. Dotton, 1 reception, 5 receiving yards. Again, K. Dotton didn't see himself much utilization within that offense in week 1. The Giants in week 2, they don't use their tight ends at all thus far this season. Mike Gesicki and Eric All Jr. in week 3, 8 receptions, 69 yards. So again, a team that finally uses their tight ends finds success against the Washington Commanders. And then we have ourselves TREY McBride in week 4, who was out due to the concussion protocol. Therefore, the Arizona Cardinals found no success from their tight ends. Going into this week, I really do believe that David NJOKU has an opportunity going up against the Commanders in a negative game script to find himself a lot of success, mainly because, again, the Commanders' offense has only punted once in the last 3 games. Therefore, we're anticipating for the Commanders to score early and often and force Deshaun Watson to have to throw for this entire game. And besides looking for potential options like Amari Cooper and Jerry Jeudy, David NJOKU is going to be one of his favorites within this offense and is definitely someone that I'm firing up going into this week. Moving on to the final hidden gem of the week, we have Tyrone Tracy, the thumbnail of today's episode, cursed with knowledge and the fact that we are probably going to be in a situation in which Devin Singletary doesn't play. Now, as of this current recording, we don't have an 100% word whether or not Devin Singletary is going to play. I know that he's dealing with a groin injury, did not practice Thursday or Wednesday. So if we're going to be in a situation where Devin Singletary is not available, and we're also going to be in a situation in which Malik Neighbors is also going to be absent, the volume of vacated targets that could potentially be in line for Tyrone Tracy, along with the potential rushing attempts that could be in line, are going to be immense. Again, the last 4 weeks of overall production from Devin Singletary have consisted of 10, 16, 14, and 16 rushing attempts. Not only that, in weeks 1 and 3, when Devin Singletary was actually utilized within the receiving game, 5 targets, 4 receptions, 4 targets, and 4 receptions. Both those games, a lot of overall usage. We can very easily find ourselves in a situation in the absence of Devin Singletary and Malik Neighbors in which Daniel Jones is not only going to target Wan'Dale Robinson, but get a lot of usage out of Tyrone Tracy within the receiving game. When we look at Tyrone Tracy's overall career going back to college, To begin his college career at Iowa, he was a primary wide receiver. Then he transferred to Purdue and became a running back. Very similar to the overall trajectory of Antonio Gibson, a former wide receiver turned running back. We have seen Antonio Gibson finish as an RB1 in fantasy football before. All that Tyrone Tracy requires is opportunity on the ground through the air, and certainly he's going to get that this week. They took on the Seattle Seahawks. The Seahawks are allowing 16.55 fantasy points per game just off of rushing statistics isolated to opposing running backs. It's not out of the realm of possibility in which Tyrone Tracy can finish this game with 15 plus touches, and if he's able to do so, can certainly be a top 24 running back by the end of the week. All right, that's going to cover it in regards to my hidden gems for week 5 of the 2024 fantasy football season. Now let's go ahead and let's transition via Underdog and put together a couple pick'em slips for this upcoming weekend. Last weekend we hit, but do not forget, again, if you're trying to take advantage of the new customer special, when you sign up today using code Andrew via Underdog, not only are you going to be able to get my rankings every Sunday, but you're also going to be able to take advantage of the free pick. Put that in with potentially some of the overall suggestions that I make here, and let's go ahead and let's start winning. So in regards to the upcoming plays that I really like going into this weekend, we have the following. We're going to begin with Eric All Jr., the rookie tight end of the Cincinnati Bengals, going higher than 2.5 receptions. Over the course of the last 3 consecutive games, he has had 4 or more receptions. He takes on the Baltimore Ravens, who additionally have allowed the second most receptions to opposing tight ends thus far this season, with 29 total in the matter of 4 games. So if we're going to be in a situation in which both Mike Gesicki and Eric All are going to continue to coexist, on top of the fact that we have heard earlier this week the head coach and primary play caller of the Cincinnati Bengals come out and specifically say that Eric All's playing incredibly well. He's going about it the right way. He's going to get himself more opportunity going forward. Eric All plays more snaps already than Mike Gesicki. He gets himself more receptions on a per game average than Mike Gesicki. So if we're going to be in a situation in which, for a 4th consecutive game, he's able to get himself over 3 receptions, I think the overall opportunity is there, especially in a negative game script, taking on the Baltimore Ravens. Then we have Brock Bowers, another rookie tight end that I trust, going higher than 3.5 receptions. Michael Mayer is probably going to miss another game, and Devontae Adams isn't scheduled to play another game for the Las Vegas Raiders ever again in his entire career. They take on the Broncos this week, which again has a talented defense and a talented secondary. When Jacoby Myers and Trey Tucker are going to have difficulties with their overall coverage, Gardner Minshew is going to have to look in the direction of Brock Bowers, especially considering over the course of the last couple games, the Denver Broncos defense has allowed 5, 8, and 6 receptions to opposing tight ends. So again, the idea of an absent Michael Mayer and Devontae Adams and Brock Bowers not getting 4 receptions is completely out of the realm of possibility in my mind. I think Brock Bowers is a lock within this overall position. Therefore, I'm firing him up with this overall entry. The final player is Chuba Hubbard with 60.5 rushing yards. We're going to take the higher on that because, again, Chuba Hubbard has been able to surpass over 100 rushing yards in each of the last 2 games. But not only that, takes on the Bears this upcoming weekend. The Bears have allowed the following rushing yards to opposing running backs: Kyren Williams, 94, Jonathan Taylor, 110, Pollard, 82. Now, when we go ahead and combine all running backs from every single week thus far this season and the rushing yards allowed per game on average, 102.25 on a per game average to running backs. Therefore, Chuba Hubbard is in line with this great offense to continue to, keep that momentum going for another consecutive week and surpass 60.5 rushing yards. The other play that I want to go ahead and make, again, because every single week I've made $1,000 worth of entries. Obviously, last week we got saved by that overall play, and it was like a 500 turning into 2,400 or something of that exchange. This week, hopefully this is going to save us. Derrick Henry, anytime total touchdown. Again, he has scored a touchdown once in each of the last 4 games. Additionally, you have vulture protection. So if in fact Lamar Jackson, who has had himself a rushing touchdown in each of the last 2 games, if in fact he is going to step in and steal a rushing touchdown, you'd be vulture protected and you'd be good to go. Then we move on to Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence in this overall situation, 1.5 passing touchdowns is a free play in my opinion, especially when you look at the track record of Trevor Lawrence taking on the Indianapolis Colts. Who the Indianapolis Colts, again, they have been torched over the course of this entire season as a defense, whether it's on the ground or through the air. But when you look at Trevor Lawrence's overall track record, over the course of the last 5 games in which he has played against the Indianapolis Colts, every single one of those games have consisted of 2 or more touchdowns. And additionally, he has a 77% passing completion percentage in those 5 games against the Colts, 112 out of 146 passing. So we're anticipating a bounce back week and hopefully the first win for the Jacksonville Jaguars season this week. And then the final play is Josh Jacobs. Again, many of you have given up on Josh Jacobs. I have yet to do so, and I'm putting my money where my mouth is. Josh Jacobs is going to score a touchdown this weekend against the Rams. Again, the Rams are one of the easiest matchups at the position, and even though Josh Jacobs hasn't scored a touchdown all season long, he is not the new Miles Sanders. He's not going to go a full season without scoring a touchdown. I doubt that is going to happen. Thus far this season, the Rams have allowed 5 rushing touchdowns to opposing running backs, but as a whole, they are a top 10 matchup at the running back position in regards to overall rushing statistics allowed to opposing running running backs. The Packers are going to be in a positive game script, and when they are, they're going to continue to run the ball and expect Josh Jacobs to find himself success and specifically find himself in the end zone. These are my two favorite groups of plays going into the week. You can mix and match them based on your overall opinion, or you can go ahead and travel to Underdog today and play your own plays, whatever you want. Of course, do that responsibly. Thank you, everybody, for watching. I'll be back later tonight, of course, live streaming on the channel, Saturday afternoon from 1 to 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And this upcoming Sunday morning, a very special early live stream starting at 6 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Do not forget, there is a London game starting at 6:30 a.m. So I'll be here for 4 hours on Sunday morning. For those of you interested, swing on by. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.